In this lecture, we're going to be looking at materials in the Blender Render engine. We're going to be looking at the typical things that you can do using Blender Render and why this simplistic form of Blender is better for exporting models to other programs such as Unity. So let's have a look at the Blender Render engine. So when we open up our new scene, we have to make sure that this icon up the top says Blender Render. If it says either Blender Game or Cycles Render, then you're in the wrong engine and you need to make sure that you click Blender Render. However, so it shouldn't be a problem. Currently, we are not in solid shading. In case you may have noticed that the shading of our cube is a little bit different to normal, I'm currently in material shading. So if we go back to solid, we can see the shading is different. So now I'm going to go to material shading and I'm going to go to the materials tab in the properties, and we now have this tab to work with. So first things, we're going to go through these 4 subsections in this lecture. Preview shows us a preview of the coloration of our object. We can change what primitive form this is, so I can have my cube there, Suzanne. We've even got a hair preview here and a circular with the world background. We're going to choose cube because obviously that's what we're working with. Next one down is diffuse. Now if you don't know what the word diffuse means, it is basically a form of coloration where the colour is constant across an entire surface. So basically what happens with a diffuse colour is light will hit it and it will scatter evenly across the entire surface. So for example, I'm going to change the diffused colour by left clicking on the white bar, and I'm going to select a nice green colour. And we can see that we have now given our object a green material. If we look at each face, we can see that the colour is fairly consistent across that entire face. Obviously, the more light that reflects on that face, the more colour we will see. Note that in Blender Render, if the light source hits the face, then we get a nice constant colour. But if it doesn't hit the face, then the entire face is going to be black like these here. Next we have specular. This is basically more of a glossy type colour to choose. So if we defer this one back to white and we click specular, and we're going to go for the same colour so we can see the difference and confirm. Nothing's happening. The reason why is because if we have a look, something is happening, but it's a little bit different. So specular doesn't really change the colour of the object itself. What it does is it gives the light a colour when it bounces off the object. So as you can see, as I hover over, we get the light source hitting the top of the face and a nice green reflection appears on the face. We can combine these two together, so I can click diffuse and I'm going to go for a very light, like green bluish colour. And as we can see now, we can see a little bit more clearly that as we hover over, we get the specular green that just shines when hit by the light source, which is up here. Finally, we have the shading section. This shading section helps us to determine how much light our object can emit from itself. So if we move this above 0, we can see now that all of the faces have lit up quite dramatically. This is because the object is now emitting light. We have ambient values and translucence values, but we don't need to worry about these for now. So turn that down to 0 and we get our classic shading again. We also have several ways in which we can view our object. So we have surface view, wire view, which shows how we could see it in wireframe mode, volume, which is quite a grainy effect, and halo, which basically creates, as we can see there, a series of coordinates where the vertices were. So there you go guys, there's your introduction to Blender Render. Play about with it a little bit, see what kind of colours and shadings you can create with different objects. The reason why this is perhaps better than Cycles engine to export your models in to things like Unity is because Unity will perhaps have their own systems in place where you can apply materials, and sometimes you can have issues when applying complex materials from Cycles and importing them into Unity. You can have problems. These problems don't exist with Blender Render. So ideally, if you're creating something to import into a game software like Unity, then you can use Blender Render to use basic color options to create a template material for your objects, so that you can have a look at how these objects actually look when they've got materials applied to them, and then you can import safely into Unity where you can touch up on the designs. So there we go guys, that's materials in Blender Render.